Sir, I need you to put the weapon down right now. The voice was young, sharp, and full of fake confidence. John Carter, 83 years old, didn't move. He didn't even look up. His hands were wrinkled and had age spots, but they were steady as rocks. He was cleaning a rifle with a soft cloth. The rifle sat across his lap. The sun was warm and gentle. It came through the leaves of a big oak tree in the center of the courtyard. John sat on a simple stone bench. He looked peaceful, a man at peace. But the two men standing over him were not peaceful. They wore the dark blue uniforms of the Peaceful Gardens Senior Living Community's private security team. The younger one had a name tag that said Brian. He stood with his feet apart, a tough guy stance. His partner, older and heavier, had a name tag that said Carl. He hung back a step. His face looked more tired than mean. "Did you hear me, old man?" Brian said louder. "This is private property. You can't be out here with that." He pointed at the rifle. John finished his slow pass with the cloth. Only then did he lift his head. His eyes were pale blue, but they were clear and direct. They held no fear, no anger. They just observed. They looked at the young man's shiny shoes, his pressed pants, the slight shake in his body. "It's a beautiful day, son," John said. His voice was low and rough. "I'm just cleaning my rifle. The wetness in the air is bad for it." Brian let out a short laugh. "The humidity? I don't care if it's raining frogs. The rules here are crystal clear. No guns in common areas. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Put it down." John's gaze drifted past Brian. He looked toward the rose bushes and the perfect lawn. A few other old people had noticed what was happening. Mrs. Garcia from Building 2B stopped her slow walk. She held her purse tight. Mr. Lee, working on his prize flowers, stood up straighter. This was a place of quiet living, not fighting. The sight of two uniformed guards standing over quiet old John was wrong. "This rifle hasn't been fired in 50 years, John said calmly. He kept looking at the weapon. His fingers traced a line of faint words carved on the metal. "It's more a piece of history than a weapon at this point." "It's a gun," Brian snapped. His patience was gone. He was used to dealing with confused old people who lost their keys or complained about noise. This quiet refusal was new, and it hurt his ego. He took a step closer. His shadow fell over John. "And you're a resident, which means you follow the rules. I'm not playing games. Hand it over." Carl, the older guard, shifted his weight. "Brian, take it easy," he said quietly. "He's just an old guy. Let's just ask him to take it back to his room." "He's breaking the rules, Carl," Brian shot back. "We have to show we're in charge." He straightened up. "Sir, I need to see your resident ID and I need you to give me the weapon." John sighed, a soft, weary sound. He laid the cloth aside and carefully placed the rifle on the bench next to him. He did not hand it over. He then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open to show his resident ID. He held it out for Brian to see. Brian snatched the wallet from John's hand, a rude act that made the watching people gasp. He studied the ID. "John Carter, room 3G. He then flipped through the other parts of the wallet. His movements were jerky and nosy. "What's all this junk?" he said, pulling out a faded folded piece of cloth. It was a small torn patch with a strange symbol on it. "Playing soldier in your old age?" John's eyes got hard for just a second. The calm surface rippled, showing something deep and cold beneath. "Put that back," he said. His voice lost its gentle rasp. It was replaced by something harder, something with sharp edges. "Or what?" Brian challenged. A smirk came on his lips. He was enjoying this, the feeling of power over the old man who dared to say no. He felt the eyes of the other people on him and thought they liked what he was doing. "You going to challenge me to a fight with your little gun?" He pointed again at the rifle on the bench. He leaned down, looking at the metal part. "What's this writing on here? Project Ivory Snake. We who are not. What kind of stupid nonsense is that? Some kind of club for you old guys?" He reached out. His fingers traced the carving, smudging the oil John had so carefully put on. It was a touch that crossed a final line. In that moment, everything faded away for John. The smell of gun oil was suddenly replaced by the thick smell of blood and gunpowder. The warm sun became a hot, heavy heat pressing down through a thick jungle. The soft sounds of the people turned into the buzz of insects, and the distant, scary sound of enemy fire. He felt the weight of the rifle not on the bench beside him, but pressed into his shoulder. He saw a face, young, barely 20, with freckles across a broken nose, eyes wide with fear and loyalty, a boy named Miller. He heard the whisper again, the one that came to him at night. "Go, Pat. Don't look back. Just go." The memory lasted less than a second, but it left thunder in its wake. He blinked, and the courtyard came back. Brian was still there, his hand on the rifle. John's hand, without thinking, shot out and grabbed the young guard's wrist. It was not a violent grab, but it was impossibly firm. The grip of a man whose hands had known nothing but hard work. The strength in that grip was shocking. Brian yelped, more in surprise than pain, and tried to pull his wrist away. He couldn't. "You will not touch this rifle again," John said. His voice was flat and empty of all feeling. It was more scary than if he had shouted. Across the courtyard. A young woman named Lisa had seen enough. She had been visiting her grandfather and was cutting through the courtyard to get to the parking lot. She saw the guards, the quiet old man, and the growing anger. She saw Brian snatch the wallet and mock the patch. She saw him put his hands on the rifle, and she saw the old man's reaction. Her own father had served 2 tours in Iraq. He had things like that, things that looked like junk to others but were sacred to him. She knew what she was seeing, a violation. While Brian was trying to break free from John's grip, Lisa had her phone out. She didn't call 911. She scrolled through her contacts to a name she had saved under "in case of emergency." It was the direct line for a colonel at Fort Bragg, a man she'd met at a military family conference a few years ago. He had told her, "If you ever see a soldier or a veteran being done wrong, you call me day or night." She'd never thought she would use it. She pressed the call button and moved behind a large potted tree. Her heart was pounding. "Colonel Henderson's office." "This is Lisa Martin," she said, her voice tight and low. "I met the colonel in 2019. He told me to call if I ever saw something." There was a pause. "What kind of something, Miss Martin?" "I'm at the Peaceful Gardens senior living community in Fayetteville," she said quickly, her eyes fixed on what was happening. "The security guards here are bothering an elderly resident, an old veteran. They're trying to take his rifle from him. He was just cleaning it." "I see. Harassment is a strong word, Miss Martin. Are they being physically mean?" "One of them is," she said. "He's mocking him. He grabbed his wallet. He's putting his hands all over the man's rifle. The old man's name is John Carter." She paused. "And the rifle, there's writing carved on it." The guard read it out loud. He said, "Project Ivory Snake, we who are not." A dead silence fell on the other end of the line. For a moment, Lisa thought the call had dropped. "Miss Martin," the voice said, and it had changed completely. All the professional distance was gone, replaced by raw, focused urgency. "Repeat that name for me." "John Carter," she said, "and the carving, Project Ivory Snake, we who are not." "Stay on the line, Miss Martin. Do not hang up. Where did you say you were?" Lisa repeated the address, her voice shaking slightly. Now she had the feeling that she had just pulled the pin on a grenade. "Keep your eyes on Mr. Carter," the voice commanded. "Is he safe right now?" Lisa peeked around the tree. "The guard is trying to handcuff him. The old man isn't letting him. He's just holding on." "Help is on the way, Miss Martin. It will be there faster than you can possibly imagine." The line didn't go dead, but she heard a muffled shout on the other end. "Get me the general now. Tell him it's an Ivory Snake call. I don't care if he's in a meeting with God. Get him." At Fort Bragg, inside a room with no windows at Fort Bragg, a 2-star general was listening to a boring presentation when the door burst open. A colonel, his face sheet white, stood in the doorway, phone at his ear. He broke every rule. "General, White, sir," he said, his voice strained. "We have a situation." The general, a man known for his icy calm, glared at the colonel. This had better be about the start of World War III. "It might as well be, sir," Colonel Henderson replied. "We have a civilian report from Fayetteville. An elderly man named John Carter is being detained by private security." He took a breath. "Sir, they're trying to take his rifle. A rifle carved with the words Project Ivory Snake." The air in the room went from cold to absolute zero. The general's face seemed to crumble and reform in a single heartbeat. The name, the project, They were words from a ghost story, a legend whispered in quiet tones in the highest levels of special operations. They were not supposed to be real. General White stood up, knocking his chair back. He looked at the junior officers in the room. "Everyone out," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Henderson, you stay." The room cleared in seconds. The general walked over to the colonel, taking the phone from his hand. "This is General White. Who am I speaking to?" He listened for a moment, his eyes closed. "All right, Miss Martin, you've done well. Just keep watching." He handed the phone back to Henderson. "Get me a real-time satellite image of that location," he barked. "Scramble the quick reaction force. I want 2 helicopters in the air 5 minutes ago. No markings, plain uniforms. I'm going with them." "Sir," the aide stammered, "a quick reaction force for a civilian problem?" General White turned, and his eyes were blazing. "That man is not a civilian problem," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That man is the bedrock on which this entire command was built. You get those helicopters in the air, or I will personally throw you out of one." Back in the courtyard, Brian had finally managed to break John's grip by twisting his arm. He now had handcuffs out, dangling them. "That's it, old man. You're going in," Brian snarled, his face red. "You assaulted me. You're a danger. We'll get you a nice quiet room downtown where you can be checked out. Maybe they'll have some pudding for you." Carl finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Brian's shoulder. "Brian, stop. This is too far. Let's just call the police." "I am handling it." Brian shoved his partner's hand away. He lunged for John, cuffs ready. The other people cried out in alarm. John didn't resist. He simply stood his ground, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the lawn. And then the sound came. It started as a faint chopping sound, barely heard over the birds, but it grew rapidly. It was a deep thumping that vibrated in the chest, a sound that did not belong in this quiet place. Every head in the courtyard turned, looking toward the sky. 2 black helicopters, sleek and unmarked, were coming down on them at impossible speed. They weren't flying toward the community. They were landing on it. They came straight for the big, perfect lawn. The wind from the blades hit first, a hurricane blast that tore through the courtyard, sending hats flying, scattering tools, and whipping people's clothes. The noise was deafening, a physical force. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered just 10 feet off the ground. Side doors slid open and thick ropes dropped down. Before anyone could understand what was happening, men began to slide down. They moved with smooth, scary grace. They wore gray tactical gear. Their faces were hidden by helmets and goggles. They hit the ground and spread out, creating a secure area. They carried weapons but held them low. They ignored everyone, the gaping people, the stunned security guards. Their only focus was on the lead helicopter. From that helicopter, a single figure came out, not on a rope, but from steps. He was a tall man in his late 50s, wearing a simple uniform, but he moved with total command. It was General White. He walked across the lawn, his boots making no sound in the chaos. His eyes were locked on John Carter. He walked straight through the men who had formed a circle, directly toward John at the bench. Brian and Carl were frozen. Their petty fight was now meaningless. They looked like children in the face of this overwhelming show of professional power. General White came to a stop a few feet from John. He didn't look at the cowering security guards. He didn't look at the staring crowd. His gaze fell to the rifle resting on the bench. He leaned down slightly, his eyes scanning the faint carving on the metal. He read the words, "Project Ivory Snake, we who are not." His stern, combat-hardened face softened into an expression of pure awe. He stood up straight. His back was stiff. He brought his hand up to his forehead in a salute so sharp, so perfect it seemed to cut the air. It was not the quick gesture of a superior officer. It was the salute of a student to a master, of a believer in the presence of a living saint. "Mr. Carter," the general's voice boomed, cutting through the noise of the helicopter blades. "General Allen White, United States Army. It is an honor, sir, an absolute honor." John looked at the general. A flicker of recognition came to his pale blue eyes. He gave a slow, tired nod. The general held his salute for a long moment before dropping his hand. He then turned to face the confused group of people and the terrified security guards. His voice took on a formal tone, as if he were giving a speech. For the benefit of those who do not understand what they are witnessing, he began, his voice ringing with authority. Let me be clear. You are in the presence of a ghost, a man whose name is a myth in the halls I walk. This man, John Carter, was a founding member of a special mission unit that, for all official purposes, never existed. He pointed toward the silent soldiers on the lawn. The operators you see here, the men you know as Delta Force, the most elite soldiers in the world, they are merely an evolution of what he began. They walk in the path he and a handful of other men carved with nothing but their courage and their weapons. His gaze fell on Brian, and the temperature seemed to drop another 20 degrees. This man and his team did missions so secret, so dangerous that they were completely deniable. They had no support, no rescue, and no recognition. They worked in the darkest corners of the Cold War, stopping conflicts that you have never read about in your history books. They saved thousands of lives, entire nations, and history will never once mention their names. They were ghosts. They were a whisper on the wind. He pointed at the rifle on the bench. And that weapon, that is not just a gun. That is a relic. That is one of the original 6 rifles made for Project Ivory Snake. It is a piece of American history more important than half the things in the Smithsonian. The carving on it was their motto, "We who are not." Because in the eyes of their country, they were not there. They did not exist, but they were there. And thank God they were. A deep silence fell on the courtyard, broken only by the whir of the rotor blades. The people stared at John, this quiet man they knew from potluck dinners and bingo nights, and saw him for the first time. They saw not a frail old man, but a pillar of history, a silent guardian who had walked through fire so they could live in peace. The general turned his full attention to Brian and Carl, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were low and precise, and they cut like ice. You, he said, locking eyes with Brian, are a disgrace. You wear a uniform and you project authority, but you have no concept of what true service is. You mistook age for weakness. You mistook silence for submission. You put your hands on a man who has more honor in his little finger than you will ever have in your entire pathetic life. You have failed in every way to do your duty. He looked from Brian to Carl. Your company's contract to provide security for this place is now under review. And I assure you, my review process is very thorough. You can expect a call from my office. He turned back to John, his face softening once more. But before he could speak, John raised a hand, a quiet gesture that stopped the general. John stepped forward and looked at Brian, whose face was a sweating mask of fear and shame. He was just doing his job, General, John said, his voice gentle again. A little too much vinegar, not enough honey maybe, but he's young. We were all young once, weren't we? Full of fire, certain we knew everything. The grace in that moment was overwhelming. John's simple act of forgiveness was more powerful than the general's angry words could ever be. It showed the deep difference between them. One was a boy playing at power. The other was a man who had wielded true power and had learned the value of mercy. In the weeks that followed, the security company, under huge pressure from the Department of Defense, issued a formal public apology to John Carter. They started a mandatory company-wide veteran training program designed with General White's office. Carl was moved to a different job. Brian was fired. About a month later, John was sitting in his usual booth at a small local diner, enjoying a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. The bell over the door rang, and in walked Brian, no longer in a uniform but in jeans and a faded t-shirt. He looked thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by deep weariness. He saw John, and for a moment he froze, as if ready to run. Then he took a deep breath and walked over to the booth. He stood there for a long moment, unable to meet John's eyes. Finally, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and laid it on the table. "That's for your pie, sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And your coffee. I'm sorry for everything. I was an idiot." John looked at the young man, at the real regret in his face. He pushed the $20 bill back across the table. "Keep your money, son," he said, pointing to the empty seat across from him. "Sit down. Tell me about yourself." Brian hesitated, then slowly slid into the booth. A quiet understanding passed between them. A moment of peace forged in the fire of a lesson, learned by one and gracefully taught by the other. The quietest heroes often carry the heaviest history. Their valor isn't found in shouted words or shiny medals, but in the silent dignity with which they live their lives. If you were moved by John Carter's story, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our veterans, and subscribe for more stories of the brave.